Now, that's the first time I've ever stood at a podium without saying everything. You all behaved. I'm impressed. Wow. We're not quite ready to start yet. We have a few more minutes, so you all can keep talking. I should have asked you for money. Oh, we are ready. Wow. Holly's so great. She's always telling me things. Well, we're ready to go, and so I think we'll go ahead and start. Individuals, families, college campuses, emergency rooms, communities, all of us have paid and continue to pay a high price for these seats today. And so I'm glad to see that they're filled. As you can see, this is a standing room issue only. And we are glad that you are here with us today. Welcome, everybody. My name is William Moyers. I am the Vice President of Public Affairs for the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, one of the hosts of today's events, and we are grateful that you are here, too. I'm also a person in long-term recovery from the disease of addiction to alcohol and other drugs. One day at a time, recovery does happen. I also want to extend a special welcome to everybody tuning into the live broadcast on the Hazel and Betty Ford Institute for Recovery's advocacy website. And because this is a live broadcast and because we have so many young people here who know about tweeting and social media and all those things that I don't understand, guess what? I'm not going to tell you to put your cell phones away. Just put them on silent. I am your moderator, which means I'm your glorified timekeeper for today's event. We're slotted to go for 2 hours, and 2 hours is what we are dedicated to doing before we need to be out of here shortly after 2 o'clock. We are pleased to have with us many members of Congress today, and I know that right off the bat we want to start with our first speaker. We have Senator Whitehouse is here. Is that correct? Senator Whitehouse, come on up to the stage. You're a man who doesn't really need an introduction. And besides, there you go. The fact that you got an applause means that everybody knows what I know, which is you are a true champion. You're a true champion for the issues that bring us into this room today, the standing room issue of epidemic of opiates among young people and others as well. And I just want to thank you personally and professionally for not only being a champion here in Congress and representing your constituents well, but representing all constituents across the country. You're a United States Senator, but you're our Senator, among others, when it comes to this issue. And so without further ado, I invite Senator Whitehouse to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, William. That is really nice of you, and I wish my wife were here to demand equal time in rebuttal. But I'm grateful to be invited, and I'm particularly pleased to see the turnout and enthusiasm, because I think we are at a time of real cultural shift on this. It was not very long ago, at least by my standards, that addiction was a personal failing, was stigmatized, was something that you talked about only among certain people. You didn't want it to be out there. It was as if some moral failing had befallen you. And we're out of that, I think, largely. And people understand that this is a medical condition, that it is amenable to treatment. And I think a lot of people are actually coming to the point where they're beginning to realize that if you have a condition that makes you likely to become addicted to substances, then the path that is there for you to recovery is actually a pretty brave path. It's actually a very commendable thing. And so there's a little bit of pride and a little bit of light and a little bit of confidence coming into what had been a dark and lonely place not too long ago. And I thank all of you for that, because that I didn't have anything to do with. That's the community really starting to assert itself, and family members starting to gather around and just demand change to a more correct attitude. And of course, the science supports it, but then you're here in Washington, so what do we care about science here, right? It's particularly important when you're dealing with young people. You know, we've always thought that young people made decisions that weren't so great because, frankly, they were young, they didn't have a lot of life experience yet, they were emerging from childhood and were facing new challenges for the first time and hadn't had to learn how to adapt to those more dangerous challenges that they faced on emerging from childhood, that they had that sense of invincibility that is associated with youth. But it actually turns out that there are core underlying brain development issues that make younger people more likely to engage in risky behavior. And we also know that when they go down the road and it takes them into a space of addiction, the consequences are more significant because that brain development process is still going on. I think there was a report not too long ago in the New York Science page, Science Tuesday, that said that the male brain doesn't really develop until you're about 26. I know people who would debate whether that's actually maybe prejudging a little bit early. And anyway, there's certainly a bell curve, and there are going to be people out there a bit. So, you know, facing this issue for young people is particularly significant. And what we find is that not only is the problem just a little bit different with young people, but they tend to be less amenable to getting into treatment. Maybe it's the invincibility thing. Maybe it's just that there's that assertion of independence. I'm getting out from under my parents' control. I'm just going to do my own way. Who knows what it is? But what you're doing to reinforce and support that when young people do get involved in an addiction, that the support needs to be there for them, and that the path to follow that support to recovery is a noble one and one that they can be proud of. I think that's the important message. I can tell you that even in this harshly divided city on many topics, this question has also emerged from the political shadows. And we are getting very, very good support for my Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. On the Republican side, Senator Portman, Senator Kirk, and Senator Ayotte have been in there from the beginning. They have been participating in all the different national forums that we've had here in Washington to inform the development of that bill. And their only weakness is that none of them sit on the Judiciary Committee where the bill is going to move. And I'm delighted to share with you all that Senator Orrin Hatch and Senator Lindsey Graham, both on the Judiciary Committee, have joined as co-sponsors, and we're starting to have conversations. We're starting to have conversations with Chairman Grassley about when to schedule time for the bill in the committee. So it's an exciting time. We focus on a whole array of issues in the bill, but in particular, we focus on making sure that young people have access to the treatment that they may need and the support that they may need. So your work is really great work. And I'm really proud to be associated with this community. We are at a great point, I think, where really significant change is happening. And it's just a time for optimism about this issue. Doesn't mean we don't have to work hard. Doesn't mean there aren't going to be political disappointments and setbacks along the way. But I feel a whole different light on this subject, and I feel a lot of bipartisan strength. And so let's keep working together. But thank you all very much for what you've done. Thank you to the panel for being here, and welcome to the Senate Visitors Center. I may be your landlord, in which case I do want my damage deposit back, so behave yourselves. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate you being here. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, the author of the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act. Thank you so much for being here today. Addiction is a bipartisan problem that demands a bipartisan solution. At this time, we also have another advocate who works on our behalf who's with us now at this time. Congressman Stephen Lynch is the co-chair of the Prescription Drug Abuse Caucus, a Democrat from Massachusetts. Please help me welcome to the podium Representative Lynch.
Thank you. Thank you, William. Thank you very much, and I want to applaud the work of Senator Whitehouse and others who have been working on this for quite a while, including my former colleague, Mary Bono, who was with us when we first put together the caucus on prescription drug abuse with Hal Rogers, and so many of you in this room that have been helping us on this issue as well. I want to thank William Moyers for his work, and I really appreciate the Hazelden and Betty Ford Institute for Recovery Advocacy and the Christie's Foundation commitment to help us on this issue. I came to this issue as a state representative. I had a suicide cluster in my district. I had 16 of our young boys take their own lives, many of them with opioid problems. And the darkest days of my life as an elected official, trying to figure out how to stop that, how to deal with that. We ended up, these are all adolescents, so we had a problem in our community and across the state of Massachusetts where our substance abuse treatment framework and infrastructure was geared towards adults. And so these kids at such a young age, we were forced initially to co-locate children with adults, and that just was not a good situation. So with some help from the labor unions, I'm a former union president, and our local hospitals and health center, and with the CDC in Atlanta, we collaborated and created the first of its type adolescent recovery home in South Boston, the Cushing House for Boys. And of course, this problem knows it does not discriminate, so now we have I was also a founder of the Cushing House for Girls, so we've got 40 beds there, and the line is out the door, unfortunately, for help in that respect. But it did cause me to think deeply about this issue, about the nature of this problem, and that is that we have a drug industry that is creating customers for life, because this substance is so powerfully addictive. I had a young woman who came to my office who is now in recovery, thank God, but she explained to me how she got in this predicament. She had wisdom teeth pulled, and she got a prescription for OxyContin, and got another prescription and another prescription for the pain. And then, unbelievably, when she couldn't get any more prescriptions, she complained about false tooth pain, so she could have another tooth extracted so she could get more prescriptions. So you have young people yanking teeth out of their head to get these drugs. And we all know the impact that these drugs in the long term have on the way the brain works to suppress pain. But there is that underlying question about whether society should allow pharmaceutical companies to create a product that is so powerful it creates customers for life. We have to think about that. I actually, in response to my situation, I actually filed a bill to ban OxyContin. And because there are probably 5 or 6 pharmaceutical lobbyists for every member of Congress, I was soon overwhelmed. And that didn't work. But we've tried different. We've tried a different approach here with friends like Mary Bono and others and Hal Rogers, trying to deal with this situation. And we are blessed. You know, we've come up with we've come up with a menu of responses that are probably reflected in this room entirely. One of the better approaches has been the drug court. I started a total immersion program in Massachusetts where it's sort of the precursor of the drug court model. When I visit the prisons, and I've visited all of them in my state, basically all the big ones, 80 to 90% of those inmates are duly addicted. We are not going to incarcerate our way out of this problem. It's just impossible. We will not. So we've got to come up with a different model. And I think the drug court model, it brings in family, it brings in employers, it brings in, and this is with respect to that individual, it brings in obviously the court system, the law enforcement, it brings in the substance abuse advocates, and together, and also the community, together we can sort of approach this problem, and our sheriffs as well. So it's a holistic approach that we're trying here now, and that is only possible because of your involvement, because of your advocacy, because of your bringing resources, not just financial, but also the resources of your experience and your skill and professionalism in dealing with this problem. We can win this battle. It's going to take a while, but we've even got the insurers on board. Blue Cross Blue Shield recently, we've got a problem with doctor shopping on the prescription drug end. Well, Blue Cross Blue Shield on their own initiative, basically instituted a framework where we can stop some of that, and that was great to have them come on board. Some of the pharmaceutical companies have stepped up and said, we're going to adopt a tamper-proof way of producing our drug that's helped our situation enormously. So, the pressure is being felt, and we're seeing some good results. But I just wanted to come here to say thank you. First of all, welcome to Washington, and your presence is being felt, and also thank you for the work that you do every day on behalf of the people that we care about and worry about in our districts every single day. So, God bless you all, and God bless these United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
No, thank you.
Really, thank you. Well, I'm impressed. We're 10 minutes in. We're 15 minutes ahead of schedule. We've already had 2 members of Congress to the podium, and we're doing all right so far. And we're about to have a third as well. I just could formally introduce our next speaker, Senator Amy Klobuchar, the senior senator from my state of Minnesota. I could formally introduce her as a great champion for many issues that matter in Minnesota and around this country. But Senator Klobuchar, you really are a great champion, a lead co-sponsor of the CARE Act, but also a great champion of addiction treatment and recovery issues in Minnesota and across the country. And I have to tell you, I remember a few years ago when you came to one of the events that we had to fundraise. Hazel and Betty Ford is a healthy and prosperous organization, but we're still a not-for-profit and we have to raise money. And you came to a fundraiser that we had at our youth facility in Plymouth, Minnesota. And that night you mounted the podium as a leading senator in this country and a senator from Minnesota, but you told a heartfelt, personal story. And I think that if more Republicans and Democrats in Congress were to share their own experiences with the issues that come here today, we would do a much better job, as you have done, in advancing these issues down the court. So thank you for your politics and your professionalism and your leadership, but also thanks for the courage that it takes to stand up and speak out as somebody who knows firsthand about these issues. Senator Amy Klobuchar.
A bunch of guys up here. It's kind of tall. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm excited. Our U.S. Attorney, Andy Lugar, was here. I was honored to recommend him to the president. He's doing a lot in this area. And my favorite thing on Andy was that he's really from Brooklyn, and he somehow ended up in Minnesota. I may as well start with a funny story about you. I mean, come on. And they were staying at his future in-laws' house, and he was married already. They had a kid. They're at the in-laws' house, and they're in the backyard, and his little daughter goes, "Dad, there's a deer." And she says, "Oh, Stephanie," he says, "don't make things up like that. You shouldn't make things up." He turns around, there's this big deer in the backyard. Being from Brooklyn, not being used to Minnesota, being in the suburbs of Minneapolis and seeing a deer, he runs in and calls the police. I'm not kidding. And he goes, "There's a deer in the yard. What should we do?" He thought it escaped. He thought that it escaped from the zoo. And somehow I was able to still recommend him to his job. And how much fun did I have at his swearing in, telling that story in front of 300 police chiefs? Yes. Okay, so we are on another topic today, and that is the great work that you're all doing. Thank you to Hazelton Betty Ford. Thank you to Mark, our chair here, and the president, and for all the work that he's done in his purple Viking tie. Thank you for that. Dr. Lee, we did a forum out at Hazelton, and I was just so impressed on prescription drug addiction, on heroin addiction, something I know you'll be talking about today. You already heard on the Senate side from my colleague, Senator Whitehouse. The two of us, as well as Senator Portman and Senator Ayotte, are the bipartisan lead sponsors of this important bill, the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Bill. And we are very excited about the kind of bipartisan support we're seeing. I think you're also seeing it being discussed now, these issues in the presidential race. I predict it will be a major part, having talked to one of the candidates about this particular topic last week. So I'm very, very excited about that. I think you all know I'm not going to give you all these statistics, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about what Bill was referring to. And so I come to this really in two ways. One, my former job as a prosecutor, I ran an office of 400 people. It was the DA, the biggest DA's office in Minnesota. And we had one of the first drug courts. We had Paul Wellstone in our state, who was a senator who advocated for drug courts, and Sheila Wellstone. We had people that were there at the beginning working on this issue. Jim Ramstad, who's been an incredible leader, a Republican congressman. And so it's in their footsteps that I walk, because I took on the issue of the drug court funding. And as we look at some of the sentencing reform that we're talking about, I'm always going to make the case that we should tie that in with more funding for drug courts, because we should reduce some of the federal drug sentences. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, we don't just want to let people with nothing. And this idea of doing more with drug courts and doing more with treatment should be tied directly to these reductions in sentences. Because if we are going to get people out of prison earlier, which is a laudable goal and the right thing to do, we should also make sure they have the resources for the treatment. And we should have, of course, drug courts on both the local and the federal level. The other place I come from is being the daughter of an alcoholic. And this was what Bill was referring to. When I was growing up, my dad was a pretty famous newspaper sports columnist. He covered the Vikings from their early years on, and back then drinking was part of life. He once was in a fist fight with Norm Van Brocklin, the former Vikings coach, and they were both pretty drunk, and the only thing that got broken, luckily, was the TV. But this was part of my life, and what happened in the 70s was he started to get DWIs and got two. I remember a kid scrawling, carving into my locker drunk when I'm in 7th grade, and some janitor finally got it off. And then my dad kept saying he wasn't drinking anymore, which wasn't really true. And he would do it in the basement. He'd have bottles hidden in the laundry room. For my whole time growing up. And then I started calling the newspaper, because I knew he'd be drinking. I'd take the keys away when we were driving up north. And then finally, 3 months before my wedding, actually, and a week before he was having prostate surgery, he got his third drinking violation. And this time it was the 90s. And so it was different. He was facing losing his license. He was facing jail time. And it was just so interesting to see the difference in the reaction of his employer. And because of all the work that's been done to make people understand how serious this addiction is, he actually then had to go to treatment, and he did, and then he joined AA, and then I was able to see my dad at age, he's 87 years old right now, but get married for a third time to another reformed alcoholic, not at 87, it was like 12 years ago or so, okay. So get remarried, stop drinking, and turn his life around. So that is the story. And as I've told so many people, he's an adventurer, mountain climber, and I literally have seen him climb to the highest peaks, but then go in the lowest valleys because of addiction. And so that's why I'm so committed to doing something about this. Very quickly, so you can turn to your panel of actual experts. I was the lead on the prescription drug disposal bill with Senator Cornyn. We were able to pass that a few years ago. It took way too long to get the rules done with DEA. They finally have come out. There's issues about nursing homes, and it makes it easier for places like pharmacies, which is what we really want, to take back old prescription drugs. And so while that wasn't mandatory, my next move is to really try to push to see if we can get some of our partners. Originally, I did press conferences on this bill at some of our major pharmacies because they were interested in getting involved. So we really have to start pushing this out because we know that 4 out of 5 heroin users started with prescription drugs, and that's a piece of it. Prescription drug monitoring, that has got to be key to this, and I know these issues are complicated, but based on our event that we had at Hazleton, I really came out of that believing there was more that we have to do in that area. I was at Johns Hopkins on a panel with President Clinton, who's really taken this on. A friend of his kid, I believe, died because of this kind of addiction, and it's really important to him. So I'm hoping we can do more in this space with the monitoring. The third thing, treatment, of course, just getting the funds there. And in Minnesota, we like to think of ourselves as the land of 10,000 lakes, but we're really the land of 10,000 treatment centers. And I can make the argument, as been a crime fighter there in the biggest office, that we have one of the lowest crime rates in the country and one of the lowest incarceration rates. We do a lot with probation, and it's solely because we're willing to deal with addiction, whether it's drugs or whether it's drinking or whether it's actually gambling or other things. And that has really helped us to reduce our costs in the criminal justice system, but most importantly, to reduce crime. And I'm very excited about that. Last thing I want to mention, the science of addiction. I think we've looked at it as so often in this country as a personal failing, ignoring the chronic nature of the disease. And we know the relapse rate can be somewhere between 40-60%. And that's why it's important that scientists at the National Institute on Drug Abuse investigate the underlying causes of addiction. I really believe in science. I'm the one person in the entire Congress who, during the shutdown, devoted my entire salary to the NIH. And I believe the more we can do in this country with research and using science as a tool, as we've done throughout our history, which made this country so great and made our economy strong, the more we can do. And this should be a piece of it as well. So thank you. I know you're going to have a great time. We all welcome you to our state, by the way. The State Fair is coming at the end of August. The country's largest state fair. We don't count Texas because they are open for is anyone from Texas? Oh, okay. Well, you are open for an entire month, so it doesn't count. But if you are really lucky, you will come the day we have the butter carving at the State Fair, where we actually carve Princess Kay of the Milky Way and her 11 princesses out of slabs of butter in a revolving refrigerator. So we welcome you to join us in the end of August. Thank you for caring about this issue. Again, you watch. It's going to be an issue in the presidential in a positive way. There's going to be a lot of talk about reducing drug sentences, and we have to make sure the message that goes with that is to fund treatment and fund drug courts. And I think we're going to see some major shifts in policy. So you are really here at a really important time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Three for three, and we're still ahead of schedule, so we'll try to go for 4 for 4. This is pretty good. I remember in the old days when we would do public policy with Carol McDade, when we were the Hazelton Foundation, we had a hard time getting any of our elected officials to come to any of the kinds of events. And the fact that we've got 3 and now we're about to have 4 here shows you why this is everybody's issue, including Congress's. At this time, I'd like to invite to the podium Congressman Eric Paulson. We in Minnesota are very fortunate that we had a champion in the 3rd District, Jim Ramstad, who was a great champion of parity and all the issues that so many of us know so well. And Jim chose to retire in 2008. But Eric Paulson, Congressman Paulson, was elected to that position and has continued to carry on, among other things, the good work of Jim Ramstad and others who care passionately about this issue. Congressman Paulson's district includes our youth facility in Plymouth, and we thank you for the time that you've spent coming out to see it and for your great advocacy work. And so at this time, I ask that you all help me welcome to the podium Congressman Eric Paulson.
Well, just real quick, because I know you've had a chance to hear from many of the leaders on this very important issue. I would just tell you it's not only a great privilege to represent the Hazelton Betty Ford Youth Facility in Plymouth, Minnesota, along with Senator Klobuchar, and know the great treatment work that goes on there, following in the footsteps of Jim Ramstad about some of those very important issues you talked about. But as the father of 4 daughters, I will just tell you that educating them and educating youth about the dangers of these drugs is really critical and important. It couldn't come at a better time in terms of your being here. And this panel is really good to highlight that. And so we need to continue to work with student health centers and law enforcement and the recovery community to make sure this is at the top of the radar to really help so many people in need where we can really make a difference in people's lives. So just thanks for being here and thanks for your leadership and what you're doing. And we got to continue to carry the word with many of our other colleagues that aren't as familiar with these issues, to be honest. So your meetings and visits on the Hill, along with the expertise you hear from these folks, really will make a difference. So thank you very much. All right.
Well, so much for the script. We have to tweak it as we go along here. Do we have any other members, Holly, at this point who are here? Okay, very good. Then we'll return to the agenda as we had laid it out today, or as Jeremiah had laid it out for today. My colleague Nick Motu leads the Hazel and Betty Ford Institute for Recovery Advocacy. For this event, Nick, along with our colleagues, Dean Peterson and Jeremiah Gardner, along with the Christie Foundation, commissioned a survey of almost 1,200 college-age youth from around the country. According to the results of our survey, prescription pain medication are readily accessible, and even though public attention has been brought to the opioid crisis, and here's the cover of Time magazine this week, in case any of you were wondering, this is the issue of the moment. According to the results of this survey, the pain medication is not only accessible and public attention has not only been turned to this issue, but young people both on and off America's college campuses, despite all of the information, despite the turnout even today, young people, according to our survey, still do not appreciate the deadly dangers of such drugs. Like many other Americans, young people don't fully understand that prescription pain pills are similar to heroin in the medicine cabinet. That's a problem, especially considering that 16% of those that we surveyed said they had used pain pills not prescribed to them at some point in their lives. Our survey found that a third of our respondents said that pain pills are easy to get, many saying they could get them in less than 24 hours. The easiest source? Parents or friends or grandparents' medicine cabinets. And while 30% said they knew of someone who has overdosed, over 37% said they would not know where to go for help in the event of an overdose. Also, interestingly enough, 60% said that pain pills were not as risky as heroin, and 1 in 10 even said they had taken a pill without knowing what it is. I don't know about you, but from where I'm standing, it seems we cannot do enough to educate every generation about the issues that bring us into this room today. Young people and all Americans need to know how deadly, dangerous drugs these really are. We know, as many of us in recovery say, a drug is a drug is a drug, and we know the impact of marijuana and alcohol and cocaine and all the other drugs, but this prescription pain medication epidemic, this heroin epidemic, is one that is particularly deadly and particularly deadly to young people. We in this room today need to do a better job of educating parents, doctors, law enforcement, social workers, teachers, and government officials, not just about the dangers of prescription pain medication, but about the solution too, because as we in this room know, prevention works, treatment works, and recovery is possible. If you want to know more about our survey, I know there's been a lot of media attention thanks to our Institute for Recovery Advocacy. There's been a lot of media attention about the survey, but I think Dean and Nick, we also have put the survey results in those, are we calling them gift bags? Are we allowed to call them gift bags here? They're bags on your chairs. You never know with the ethics of the day, but they're in your bags, and you can also access them from the Hazel and Betty Ford website as well if you want to know more. At this time, I just need to take care of one other formality that I had meant to do at the beginning of the event this evening or today. I need to recognize a special of our special guests, starting, of course, Senator Klobuchar called out Mark Mishik, our president and CEO of the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, and Fred Chicos, who was with us last night at a special dinner we had. Fred had to move on today, but Fred Chicos from the Christie Foundation made it possible through his philanthropy, helped to make it possible for all of us to be here today. So to Mark Mishik and Fred Chicos, thank you very much. I also want to recognize 3 members of the Hazel and Betty Ford Board of Trustees, Mary Farnham Whitney, who's been a longtime friend of mine. Thank you, Mary, for being here today. Bill Lammers, who had to come from just a couple blocks away, right, in Washington, D.C. to be here. Thank you, Bill, for your great support of all of our work at Hazel and Betty Ford, including our advocacy work. And to my friend and fellow traveler, Mike Syme, who had to come here from Minnesota, but nevertheless came. Thank you, Mike, for you, all 3 of you, for your great work. And Andy Luger, where are you, Andy? There you are. You came from New York out to Minnesota? Yeah. Well, you came for different reasons than I did, because I came from New York to Minnesota back in 1989 to go to treatment at Hazel, and they had to get rid of me in New York. But you are now the U.S. Attorney for the state, as Senator Klobuchar said, and I want to thank you for being here today and for your very active engagement of law enforcement on this side of the issue. If we're going to have a comprehensive approach to the solution that so many of us are here today, it's going to be a solution that requires leadership of U.S. attorneys like yourself and law enforcement. So thank you, Andy, for being here today. Somebody that I don't know whether she made it or not because I didn't get to see her, Mary Lou Leary. Is Mary Lou here? Did Mary Lou Leary make it from the office of ONDCP? She didn't make it here, but, oh, where? We saw her. Okay, well, if she's around, let's just assume she's here for right now. She's the Deputy Director of State, Local, and Tribal Affairs for ONDCP. ONDCP, as we all know, has been a great advocate for so many of these issues today. So thank you for being here too, Mary Lou. Special thanks as well to our honorary co-host, the House Addiction Treatment and Recovery Caucus, chaired by Congressman Tim Ryan, and the House Caucus on Prescription Drug Abuse, led by Chairman Rogers and Congressman Lynch. Thanks to all of you for being part of the solution that brings us here today. Next, AJ. Where is AJ? There you are, AJ. AJ, you have a little bit of a difficult pronouncing. Cernercia. AJ is here representing young people in recovery. Imagine that. Young people in recovery. There was a time when I was finding recovery back in 1989, or trying to find recovery, when I thought I was a young person in recovery, and I was 30 years old back then. Now, as we'll hear and see from today, from people like you, AJ, young people in recovery are showing not just the power of addiction in young people, but also the promise and possibility of recovery. And thank you, AJ, for all your great advocacy work on behalf of all of us. Thanks to young people in recovery for standing up and speaking out. AJ. Finally, to Tim Rabolt. Where's Tim? Oh, there you are, right there. Tim. Tim is the founder of George Washington University's Students for Recovery right here in D.C. And man, what a group of students you are. I mean, there's a lot of recovery going on in college campuses all over the country, but what you've got going on at GW is, I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's certainly special, because you have developed a critical mass in a way that many other college campuses seek to replicate. And so, Tim, thank you for all of your work at GW, and also for being the intern with ONDCP and the remarkable story that you represent. At this time, would you please come up, Tim, and share a little bit of your story?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moyer. It's a little tough to follow up multiple members of Congress, but maybe the voice of a student in recovery can provide a sufficient complement to their powerful messages. Just to everyone in attendance, thank you so much for the work that all of your organizations are doing, whether it be in prevention or treatment or recovery or a related field. I wouldn't be standing up here today if it wasn't for the work that you guys are doing. And you'll hear from the panelists as well the amazing collaboration between treatment centers and nonprofits and universities. It really takes collective action to beat this thing. And the topic today, I mean, that's what I lived through, was the struggle with opioids. And I got into recovery from my substance use disorder back when I was 18 in high school, and just a month ago graduated from GW and made it through the 4 years without ever having to use. And that was... And the work you guys are doing is really allowing that dream to become a reality for so many other individuals. And I really have to give a shout out to the GW administration. We have like a whole row back there. We got everyone to come out, but it's really thank you. The work they're doing really allows our program to be sustainable, and to have staff support really means so much to all the students. And freshman orientation round 1 starts this week, so we're ready to have a new batch of individuals. But just thank you all again. We're really glad to be here.
Thank you, Tim. Also want to recognize Mary Bona, who was recognized earlier for your good work on this issue, and Carol McDade. Thank you to both of you for whipping the horses to get us moving in the right direction. We were talking about it last night at dinner. I remember Dr. Alan Leshner back in the 90s. He was then the head of NIDA, and he said to me and others when we were advancing when we were advancing the parity legislation way back when this hill was this steep. I don't mean this hill. But the hill to climb over public intolerance and stigma and the perception that parity was an irrelevant subject to constituents. Dr. Alan Leshner at NIDA said that he'd never seen a field so adept at circling the wagons and shooting inward. And, we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. And if it wasn't for the good work that you all are doing, I don't know where we'd be today. So thanks to Carol and to Mary. And also to General Arthur Dean. Thank you, General, for all your work at CATCA over the years. I remember when we would be together way back, and you're always pushing and pushing and pushing. And to see you here today means that you can still be at this a long time later and still have a smile on your face. So thank you. So let's go to the panel, right? That's one of the things we really wanted to do, was to hear from the experts down in the trenches of the issue that brings us here today. And I'd like to start off by introducing Dr. Amelia Aria. Dr. Aria is a preeminent researcher on young people and addiction. She also authored or co-authored more than 120 studies on the subject. Is that a typo or is that right? 120 studies. She also teaches at nearby University of Maryland. We're fortunate to have her expertise here today. Our survey highlighted that college kids are not insulated from the dangers of opiate use, that opioids have indeed added to the risks our young people face. Dr. Aria is going to provide some additional context to these challenges by reviewing the wider body of research around substance use issues in college-age Americans. One thing I wanted to say, too, we don't have time for Q&A. We have to be very careful today that we continue to move this along because we have to be out of here shortly after 2 o'clock. But this is a panel that begs for feedback and for comments and so on. So we're going to stick to the panel, but if at some point I sense that there's a moment that I might be able to quiz somebody, or maybe you have a question, we'll see if we can perhaps fit that in. In the meantime, though, Dr. Aria, at the podium, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, William. I'm grateful for the distinguished members of Congress who are here today, the other speakers on our panel, and for this wonderful audience. Thank you for bringing to light the seemingly intractable problem of prescription drug abuse and offering some new solutions. I appreciate the opportunity to lend my voice to this important discussion. I'm in front of you today to shatter a common myth, that substance abuse is part of the normal rite of passage to young adulthood. The most precious commodity we have as a nation is the potential of our young adults to redefine and energize our society. Substance use, whether through binge drinking at a school party or as part of a social ritual, can hijack that potential of our youth in ways that we now understand are pervasive and long-lasting. The subtle changes incurred by substance abuse on the developing minds of our youth don't only destroy individual potential, but they can cause a ripple effect of social and economic losses across our broader society. As a researcher, professor, and more critically as a parent, that like many others is challenged by a youth movement that appears to reward the stories of misspent youth as a badge of honor, I have had the chance to witness the devastating effects of all forms of drug abuse, including the non-medical use of prescription drugs. Since 2003, with my dedicated staff, I have led the College Life Study, an NIH-funded investigation of the impact of risk behaviors, including drinking and drug use. During the course of our research, we've analyzed data from over 1,200 young adults who came to the university seeking an education and a chance to define their future. Our research during the last decade has told a compelling story that is consistent and complementary to the work of many others. So consider the following findings. Nationally, close to 44,000 people died of a drug overdose in the U.S. in 2013, and about half of those were related to prescription drugs. Among 25 to 60-year-olds, drug overdose caused more deaths than motor vehicle accidents. In our College Life Study, by the fourth year of college, 23% had used a prescription analgesic without a legitimate prescription. Non-medical prescription drug use does not occur in isolation. Individuals who use prescription drugs non-medically are very likely to be heavy drinkers and users of other illicit drugs, with 94% of them using marijuana, 38 hallucinogens, and 51% cocaine. Moreover, 75% met criteria for alcohol use disorder. In short, prescription drug abuse is a red flag for marijuana and other illicit drug problems. In addition to having devastating health consequences, drug use undermines academic performance and can derail a student's pathway to success. In secondary school, we know that the research has told us that substance use is associated with poor grades and high school dropout. Similarly, in college, drug use is associated with skipping class, spending less time studying, earning lower grades, taking longer to graduate, not graduating at all. We call these the academic opportunity costs of substance use. With more and more investment in making college accessible to all, we need to make sure that students can take advantage of all those opportunities. With drug use on board, they're less likely to do so. So what can be done? It's necessary to dispel the illusions that exist around substance use. It's not benign or normative. The word experimentation is way too nice for something that is more akin to playing with fire. Tacit approval of underage drinking is okay, and college as a 5-year party is a completely misguided, but regrettably an all too common view. We must emphasize that attending class, completing assignments, using the time constructively in college is the best strategy for achieving superior academic performance and laying your foundation for a successful future. Therefore, the leaders of our nation's education system who are concerned about high school dropout, less than optimal college graduation rates, and preparedness of the workforce to function in a complex world must be engaged in substance use prevention and intervention. The insidious course of substance use and its entanglement with mental health problems, its impact on academic performance and health, becomes more and more difficult to treat the longer you wait, and you'll be hearing more about this from Dr. Lee. Finally, let's give individuals in recovery a louder voice. They have amazing stories of resilience that should be used to promote a different picture of what college should be like. A place where academic pursuits are front and center, and partying is seen as a distraction to achieving one's goals and maximizing one's potential. Just last Friday, a worried parent contacted me because she realized there were no substance-free housing at the college her son would be attending in September. He had just celebrated his 6th month of recovery. Collegiate recovery programs are currently a rarity among American higher education, and we need to change that. They should be expanded and promoted. I thank the Hazelden Betty Ford Institute for Recovery Advocacy and the Christie Foundation for shedding light on this continuing public health problem and allowing me to contribute to the solutions. Thank you.
Dr. Reed, stay right there. I want to ask you a quick question while you're at the podium. Why do you think it is, according to our survey, 60% of the people we surveyed said pain pills were not as risky as heroin? Why?
I think that developmentally there's a lack of understanding of perceived risk. And also I think that those who are risk takers are more likely to not understand that there's a difference between doing something risky and doing something dangerous. I think it's a very, very common view.
Thank you. Dr. Joe Lee is the medical director for the Youth Continuum at the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation. He is on the front line of treating young people with opioid use disorders, working directly with them each and every day. Joe Lee is really a champion for articulating these issues in a way that even young people, or especially that young people, can understand. Joe, I know the tremendous impact that you've had in working with not just our patients in our youth facility, but with their families as well. Critical. So let's hear from Dr. Joe Lee.
Thank you, William. I scribbled some notes for my little talk, but I can't read my handwriting well. I have doctor's handwriting, so. Before I begin, I want to give thanks. There are so many people who don't get the headlines, who work really hard behind the scenes, families, communities, treatment centers, individuals, and you all really deserve a tremendous amount of credit. And I also want to give thanks to the young people in the audience and on the panel here. In recovery, you guys are great ambassadors for what we do. You guys are our heart. You guys are our momentum. You guys are the why we do everything, so thank you. I want to come to you as a physician, and I could talk to you a lot about science, but I want to come to you from a place of humility, because I think we can all admit that this epidemic has been humbling for everyone. It doesn't matter what you know, and it doesn't matter how good you think you are, what you treat. There have been casualties. I always mention, and it's important to always recognize, that there were also communities who were stricken with the opioid addiction long before the nation took notice, and there were many lives lost. And it is a sad fact that we started to pay attention, not just because of the death toll. We started to pay attention because the kids who were passing away were the kids in the suburbs who looked like my kids and your kids. And so we also speak to honor the names of people who passed away who couldn't get the help they deserved. But humility is refreshing. It is not a weakness. It is a bridge to empathy and earnest introspection and courage. And together I know we can make a difference. I want to share with you some of the ways that we have committed to this change as an organization and have partnered with great people like you to make a difference for families and for young people across the country. There's a famous quote in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it says something like, "The only requirement for membership is a desire to stay sober." Well, with this crisis, we recognize the need to evolve that philosophy even further. We said that is not good enough. In fact, you don't have to want to be sober. You could be unsure, but if you're willing to have a relationship, if you're willing to just meet with us, we will meet you where you're at. And that has been the heart of our mission. That meant using medications regardless of controversy, and it's becoming less controversial, so I'm hopeful for that. Medications like Suboxone, medications like Vivitrol, medications like naloxone to resuscitate people. That was a no-brainer that we supported from the beginning. Because the name of the game now is to keep young people engaged as long as possible. Because the longer they're engaged, the greater opportunities they have to achieve success. We also started training all of our frontline clinicians in motivational interviewing, which is a therapeutic technique designed to tease out ambivalence, people who have two different minds about things, and getting them to really assert their humanistic values so they can get what they want in life. As an organization, I'm really proud that we've had the courage. We've recognized that on the front lines, we don't have the luxury of having rigid ideologies. We have done what we can, and there's still a lot more to do to help more young people and families across the country. My heart is with the families, and for the families that struggle with addiction, because addiction is a systemic disease and not just an individual one. I want to talk to you about the chronic disease model, how we talk about addiction as a chronic disease model, and how we fail to live up to that name. For example, a classic chronic disease model you might see in heart disease or diabetes. You don't just treat people when symptoms arise or when the disease is fulminant. You pick out people before symptoms occur by assessing their risk. And when symptoms go away, you still understand that those risks for chronic illnesses exist. So you make investments before treatment, during treatment, and after treatment. This is not the experience of families. So though we throw the term chronic illness around, it's not what we actually do in the ground, and we must put an end to this. It is heartbreaking enough for families to recognize that their loved one, the ones they prize the most, are addicted. Add to it sitting helplessly in chairs in the ICU, waiting for your son or daughter to wake up, the emergency room visits, the overdoses, finding out your daughter was the victim of sexual assault. So many hardships. And through this, the families we see have the resiliency to ask for help. But the infrastructure that they interface with doesn't understand risk, doesn't understand trajectory, and puts the burden of proof on these desperate families to convince them that they are sick enough to get the help they deserve. Then, when they are able to take one single breath, a small moment of reprieve, and their child is technically stable, those resources are taken away again. So we have to ask ourselves how we really want to treat a chronic illness and what we actually do on the ground, because this kind of madness must stop. I want to end by saying, there's a quote, many iterations of it. It goes something like this: the true measure of any society is found by how that society treats its most vulnerable. I Googled this, by the way, and it's attributed to Muhammad Gandhi, but you never know with Google. It could be Popeye who said it. But the point is, when you look at what we're doing through this lens, I think there are a lot of hardships, and we have to look at the mirror at a lot of our failures. And yet, when I come to this meeting, I see a lot of hope, because I see that we are turning it around. I see that people believe in humanism and that people can relate. Because fundamentally, we talk a lot about drugs and addiction, but I want to let you know that addiction is not about drugs. Addiction is about people. Addiction is about making investments in those people and understanding that they need interventions before, during, and after across the lifespan. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Joe Lee. Well, I've been doing public policy and public advocacy at Hazelden and now Hazelden Betty Ford for almost 20 years, as I said earlier. And in all those years of doing events, I never had the opportunity to introduce somebody of the stature and the leadership of our next speaker, the majority leader of the United States House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy. To have the majority leader here with us today is a great tribute, not just to the leadership that is so important to this issue, but a real testament to the issue that affects all communities across this country. Kevin McCarthy knows well the Betty Ford legacy. He represents the great state of California, where Betty Ford Center is located. We are grateful for the majority leader's leadership and for all he does for this country, and we look forward to welcoming him to the podium now. Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy. I'm William Moyers.
Thank you, William. If you want the secret to how you got me here, you had Mary ask. So, the most missed member of Congress, Mary, by far. But the great thing about it is Mary championed this cause when she was in Congress and when she's out of Congress. And I see a lot of great similarities in strength of leadership that a lot of women bring across this country, but more so from a Betty Ford and Mary. I think about where would we be. I know we're behind of where we need to be, but where would we even be if it wasn't for Betty Ford? To have the strength to step out in a position that she was, acknowledge the challenges that she had, but then say, find a solution for others. And how many lives have she changed around? I just recently was in Michigan. Fred Upton and I went up to the library and laid a wreath on both their graves. I know Gerald was from Michigan, but I think they're both from California because how long they lived there and where they were. And the topic that we talk about, it's astonishing of how it reaches every single congressional district. You go talk to Hal Rogers, it's his #1 issue. You see what Hal has done as well in Atlanta, he puts a symposium together. I sit down with the NIH and CDC, and this will be one of the number one discussions. I had to be in Europe this weekend, and I was flying back, and I was checking all the different movies, trying not to sleep. And so they had a couple of the Tribeca film festivals. So I picked this one, just because I'd been through all the rest. And it was about a family in West Virginia. Their last name was the Whites. And I'd never even heard of it, so I sat there and watched it. And you could fundamentally see generational after generational destroying and addicting, to where they tell the story of one of the young daughters who just given birth. And as she's given birth, she's going over taking some painkillers, and they're saying how they make their money. I buy a painkiller for $8, and then I go sell it for $10, get $2 more, and try to go further. But while everybody in the family, even on the birthday of the matriarch of it, who's 84 years old, they're taking the pills. But that daughter who had just given birth again, she gets her child taken away from her. And she picks up the phone while others are doing drugs and calls to try to find help. And someone says, we'll take you on Monday. But she had the courage even inside within the family to go. And they ask her, how long are you going to stay? And we'll say 3 months, 6 months. And they say, who determines that? I determine that. And towards the end of this documentary, she stayed there. She had to give her son up for a while, all for the hope of getting the other daughter back. But we watch that film and we look and we think, well, that's far away from California. That's in West Virginia. That's in the coal mines. And they're just destined to that because of their generation. Now, that could be in Bakersfield. That could be in Palm Springs. That could be in Nebraska. And we could watch that epidemic in every different place around. And I watch the statistics. We all think automobiles kill many more. And we worry about our young kids when they get away and get behind the wheel and they finally get that first freedom, right? You never sleep until they come home, until the door opens up. But these drugs kill many more than the automobiles do. And so to me, putting this on is a great step. And there's no easy answer to this, but we need to build on what this foundation has done. And it's not just based in one place. Now my understanding is around the country. Those ways that we can be helpful, those ways that we can lead. I've watched it in my own inside Bakersfield. I live in Bakersfield, California. And I belong to a couple, my wife does too, some nonprofits. And some of them deal mainly with drugs and addiction and alcoholism. And some of them visited other places before. But when they go in and tell their stories, many times it's been a spiral. It wasn't until they hit very rock bottom. And I still remember this testimony of the mother stood up, and she told the story of her daughter. And I looked at the daughter went to the same schools that I went to. Married, success, graduated from college. Family didn't even know it was happening. The husband didn't know. And then a divorce came, and there were some early signs. The family got together and turned in their life insurance to send the daughter. Came back, was clean for a while, and it all came back again. Today she's clean, but she's gone through a tremendous amount, and it wasn't just her challenge. Parents ended up losing the house too. It's everybody else's challenge. We shouldn't have to reach the bottom before we see the signs or see the change. And when I sat in this nonprofit, I went and I served lunch that day. And when I went to get in line to go through, the guy 3 seats behind me that came in for the lunch had gone to junior high and high school with me. Could have been the same people. And I will tell you, as we reach out and look at this audience, we know how it reaches everybody. And Congress is a microcosm of the country. I'm sure there's many that had that same challenge, or maybe even face it today. So I applaud what you do, but more importantly, the basis of what you're named on. If Betty Ford, in her place, in her time, could stand up and lead, and we carry the torch down to Mary as well, and not be shy of what you're able to talk about, I think we're in the right place to solve the problem. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Hold on for 1 second. I'll ask you a quick question.
Sure.
Thank you, Congressman. Before we let you go, while we have you hostage here for a minute,
Sure.
You're the leader in the House. What do you need from us to help advance legislation that addresses the opiate epidemic or addiction in general? What do you need from us to help you move legislation and get good public policy?
2/3 of my conference has been here 5 years or less. Even though this is an issue that faces every single district, it's probably not the top 3 of what they ran on. But it affects people's personal lives and people die. The most you can do is inform. And one thing I'll tell you as a member of Congress, there's a couple things that happen, right? We come from all walks of life. We're over on the Senate side. I always view the Senate as being like a country club, and the House is like having breakfast at a truck stop, okay? We just come from all walks of life. It's better. We're very Americana. But something happens when you get elected, right, and you stand before a crowd. They expect you to know everything. And we're no experts on anything. We know about this much about everything. But the way we really learn is to have to go and experience. Not that 30-minute meeting that we have each 30-minute of our life every day here. Yeah, we'll focus and we'll learn a little there and put our attention, but our attention's really fun. Have them come and visit. It affects every district. Have them be part in the district and have a personal story that they see. There is nothing more powerful than that. I will guarantee you members will come back and say, I want to get involved in this. And if you focused and made it a 1-month project, and you can look at our schedule, you'll find the weeks that were a district work period and have it that national week across. And then we can schedule something coming back, right? And you will find most members, if they go to testify, they'll tell that story they just saw. And they'll feel a commitment, but they'll also be driven to understand more. Hal Rogers is a major driver on this. He's not the youngest member of our conference. He's been here a little longer. But what he saw was in his own district. And what he's put together is continued. Well, then he partnered Vern Buchanan. I mean, many different walks of life and different economic income on both districts, but the same outcome to their constituents. To me, that is the most effective thing you can do.
Very good. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Congressman. If anyone can follow the majority leader to the mic, it's our next speaker, Sarah Nearad. Sarah, you have a big challenge and a big opportunity to follow the congressman to the mic, so come on up. Sarah is leading the collegiate recovery efforts at Ohio State University, but beyond the Ohio State University, you are leading this effort all across the country. Sarah Nearad.
Good afternoon, y'all. Thank you, William, for the introduction, and to the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation for inviting me to speak at this incredibly important event. And I would also like to thank all of the policymakers that have been with us today, and all of the policymakers that care about this issue. My name is Sarah Nearad, and I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means I've not used drugs or alcohol since August 16th of 2007. And recovery has given me my life back, but not just my life back. It's given me a better life, a life that's full of possibility and wonder. I found myself at the age of 17 years old on my second trip to residential rehab while all of my friends were starting their junior year of high school. By this point, I had experienced 2 years of active addiction and had enough emotional, spiritual, and parental consequences to make me really question where my life was going. And with the help of qualified adolescent counselors, mutual support groups, and an individual therapist, I was finally able to realize that I'd come to a fork in the road in my life. And I had two choices. I could continue on with my addiction and end up alone, isolated from my family, and doing things I swore I'd never do. Or I could play along with everyone, try the recovery thing out for a little bit, and eventually fool everyone into thinking I was better, and then I'd secretly start using again. I'm really grateful that you don't have to have pure motives in order for this recovery thing to work, because I would not be here with you today. So again, the funny thing about the recovery process, and I heard this a little bit earlier, is that it worked on me despite my lack of an honest desire for it. I did what was suggested of me. I found a new peer group. I switched high schools. I went to recovery support meetings, and I saw my favorite counselor in the whole world. And simply by going through the motions of recovery at age 17, the seeds that were planted began to grow, and my heart and my mind began to open. And not only have the seeds of recovery flourished in my life, but I have flourished as a result of that. Now, don't get me wrong, this wasn't some effortless process that was free from pain, heartache, and arguments with my parents. What really sucks is being grounded in recovery. But what sucks even more is having to bury your friends from accidental opioid overdoses. And opioids are a part of my story. And today, having buried so many of my friends, I'm more grateful than ever for my recovery and this gift. Because had I not found recovery at a young age, and had I not found programs and schools that supported my recovery through those really critical early years, I could easily have been part of the statistics. Education has always been a huge component of my recovery, from high school all the way into college. I've had recovery supports built in through the educational process. Although I didn't attend one of Houston's recovery high schools, I was able to attend an alternative school that functioned for me in a similar way. I attended Texas Tech University and was a member of their collegiate recovery community, and that experience was so great for me that I decided I wanted to go to a graduate school that did not have one of these programs, because I felt very strongly that I wanted to recreate these opportunities and that I was given, and to show other students and families the miracle of collegiate recovery. The school I chose was the Ohio State University, and I've been working there for a little over 2 years. And Ohio State has not only invested in me, but they have invested in countless students and families who will all be transformed by the work that we're doing there. Ohio's been hit hard by the increase in opioid use, and this means that we have college students who are addicted to or in recovery from opioids. Ohio State is positioning itself to be a leader in supporting college students in recovery from opioid use disorders by not only having naloxone available on campus, but by also developing a medication-assisted treatment program right there on campus for students. Yeah, thank you. We're lucky to have an opiate court in the county that Ohio State is located in, and we've seen young adults enter recovery via the criminal justice system, successfully complete the opiate court, and then graduate from Ohio State clean and sober. We're grateful for this partnership with the Franklin County Municipal Court, and we look forward to continuing to work together to support these young adults successfully graduate and sustain their recovery. By having collegiate recovery programs on college campuses, the stigma of being a student in recovery is greatly diminished. Our students are eager to get involved in the recovery advocacy movement. They're willing to put in a face and a voice to recovery, and they're willing to do a little hard work too. It's often said that college campuses are a recovery-hostile environment, and I think that statement's true on most campuses, but it's going to change. It has to change. And together we can make our college campuses the place where students go to enter and sustain their recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. You rock. You really do. Greg Williams is the award-winning director of a provocative film, The Anonymous People. Has anyone in here not seen The Anonymous People? You haven't? Well, there's still hope for you, too. Talk to Greg afterwards. But Greg is the director of this film that has done probably more to galvanize our field, not just around the issues, but around action, than anything that's come across the radar screen, certainly in many decades. So provocative and informative and inspirational has been this film that we are in the process, thanks to Greg and the film and lots of other hard work of many of those people out in the audience today, we are in the process of a huge and historic recovery rally that is being planned for October the 4th on the National Mall right here in Washington, D.C. Finally, our time has come. One of the many lessons highlighted in Greg's work is that, quote, language matters. How we talk about addiction and recovery influences how it is perceived and how it is addressed in the public sphere, like here in Congress. Our survey found that language also matters in another way. Even though heroin and prescription pain pills have the same basic makeup and effects, most young people perceive pain pills as being significantly less risky. And that's a dangerous misperception. The fact is that most people don't realize they have something so similar to heroin in their own medicine cabinets. So I'm hoping, Greg, that as you come to the podium now, you will talk to us about how we can use language to address these issues as well. Greg Williams.
Thanks, William. It's good to be here. I'm Greg Williams. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and for me that means I haven't used alcohol and other drugs in over 13 years, since I was 17. And, you know, I didn't always introduce myself that way. I was given a language when I entered recovery that talked a lot about the problem, and I think that I was brought on by that language through Pat, Taylor, and others in the faces and voices of recovery movement in William. But this topic specifically is really personal to me. At age 15, I got addicted to OxyContin, and I talk about language. I used a soundbite I swore I would never say again, but since I have the podium for 5 minutes and I'm not doing an interview on the news, Tom Coderre will be upset with me, but I used a soundbite that really characterized my thinking as a teenager, that really articulates this study that you guys, the survey that you just did. But I really perceived myself as a pharmacist. I read all about the pills at 15, 16 years old. I studied them. I learned about which ones would get me higher and which ones wouldn't. And I really got heavily into that. And I did not think I was using street drugs. I really was under the fascination that I was not using street drugs. I wasn't buying it from a drug dealer. Those kinds of things, that the messages that had been told to me as I was growing up. This is who a drug dealer is. This is where addiction happens. And this is, as a student of the media, I'll talk a little bit about the press and the media, because I think the word addiction, the word addict, the word alcoholic, as soon as I started to have problems, car accidents and overdoses and hospitalizations as a result of my addiction, I didn't see myself as a person with addiction. I didn't see myself as that, because that wasn't the imagery that was given to me growing up. And I think that I luckily found the opportunity to find treatment after a near fatal car accident. And so I'm grateful to be alive today. And I found recovery through a halfway house and other recovery support opportunities. But ultimately, it was through that journey of watching about 6 of my friends pass away and standing on those receiving lines of my friends who, they told me there was no luck in recovery when I was leaving treatment. Well, today I realize that that's not true. I'm lucky to be alive. It's my duty and my purpose to make sure that others stay alive, and I can't take that for granted. If there's things in my personal story that can have power. And so, talk about language and talk about the power of it. The idea of framing addiction in a new way, if we're going to get out of, I brought Time Magazine too as my prop, so William stole my thunder, but what William did not do was read the headline, and literally, I mean, this is not just an issue that has reached its time, but we are in the worst addiction crisis America has ever seen. 2015, this issue's been going on since the 1920s, the 1970s epidemics, the 1980s. We are amidst, in the last 10 years, the worst addiction crisis we've ever seen by any measure. And it requires us to do something bold, do something different. We're not going to get out of this crisis doing the same things and investing in the same way, in the same language, in the same messaging, in the same education techniques that we've invested in the past. I didn't see myself as a substance abuser. I know a lot of the bills in this House and this Senate use that language. Well, 15-year-olds who are using pills don't see themselves as abusers. And we need to think about that language. And we need to be assertive as advocates in telling our stories. Part of my personal story is when you gave me the language of recovery, I felt empowered, and I came back, and I give back to others through that empowerment. And so the real answers of what's happening is what we're seeing in recovery high schools and in alternative peer groups and in collegiate recovery campuses and in the empowerment of young people in recovery. And, as a result of a lot of support from Hazleton Betty Ford on the anonymous people and sort of people said, what's next? What can I do? I want to get involved. And, if this is any Judge, I mean, we had standing room only in this room today. Hazleton Betty Ford is one of 125 organizing partners that have already signed on for the rally on October 4th. We're going to need a bigger mall. I mean, it's literally, this is 85 million people that this impacts, and it's time that it's amazing to have the majority leader here and all the congressmen and senators that came, but it's time that they really see us as an electorate. Our presidential candidates need to see us as an electorate. They need to tell us what they're going to do, what they're going to invest in to make this better. We can't have articles running in Time Magazine and the New York Times and the Washington Post about the problem anymore. We need to start talking about the solution. How do we get out of this? We understand it's a crisis. We understand this is a bad problem, but it's time that we face this together. And I think part of the biggest thing that we need to do is create cultural awareness that recovery is real, possible, and attractive. Young people are influenced by their peers. Culture drives a lot of drug use. Certainly, fear of we've tried criminal justice sanctions, we've tried drug sifting dogs, we've tried these kinds of things, and at 15, 16 years old, that's not why I was using drugs and alcohol. It wasn't out of fear of criminal justice sanctions. It was what my culture was telling me. So we need to start looking a little bit broader. It's a little bit more difficult, but we need to think bigger. We need to think broader. And specifically on the opiate issue, there's some really smart policies and some specific things. In October 3rd, the Fed Up rally has a specific policy agenda to attack the opiate crisis. And then on October 4th, the addiction crisis in general. We can't just play whack-a-mole with the opiate crisis. We need to think about this broader than just the opiate crisis. We can use it as our energy, but we need to think about addiction to alcohol, addiction to methamphetamine, addiction to all sorts of other drugs. And so it's time that we bring these communities together and stop circling the wagons and shooting inward. We need to start shooting outward and grow the resources. I think that's the bottom line. And I'm really grateful to be here, and I hope to see you all on the mall on October 4th. Thanks.
Ivana Grahovic is the executive director of the national not-for-profit Transforming Youth Recovery, which was created by the Stacey Mathewson Foundation. Ivana's focus is on school-based recovery support for higher education, high schools, and community colleges, as well as life skills initiatives, family education, and K through 12 prevention and intervention. In other words, she's actually looking at the whole continuum of the issue, K through college. I've met Ivana a couple of years ago, and while there are many faces and voices of recovery, I believe yours is the most effervescent of them all, because you are always enthusiastic and lit up on this issue. And I know where that comes from, because today I got to meet your parents, and they too were effervescent in terms of their commitment, not just to your recovery, but to helping other parents understand the issues too. So Ivana, please come to the podium.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ivana Grahovic, and I am so excited and grateful to be here today. Thank you to the Honorable Mary Bono and the Christie Foundation and Hazleton Betty Ford for organizing this event today. I started using heroin when I was in college due to the ingrained campus culture that glorifies alcohol and drugs. And I thought that because I was a college student, that would be my protective factor and would prevent me from becoming a daily heroin user. But I progressed, and I started to use IV heroin daily, despite incredible opportunities like working as a White House intern in the West Wing. My parents found out that I was struggling, and they sent me to treatment twice. But treatment is an episode. And when I came back onto the college campus and there was no one to turn to, there was not a community of students that I could authentically identify with and relate to, I immediately slipped back into daily drug use. And it tacked on an additional 4 years of daily drug use onto my life. And the only reason why I graduated is because my mother, who is sitting back there, drove me to school every single day, and sat next to me in class for an entire semester so that I would not give up. Mama, wave to everyone. No parent should have to do that. I graduated and I kept on using heroin because I bought into society's stigmatizing imprint of what a heroin addict is. I thought the world didn't want me anymore. I thought that I was unredeemable and that I would never have a successful life. And so I chose to live on the streets of Detroit in winter for 2 months, thinking my family will be better off if I just die. Even though they were desperately searching for me and trying to help me. We eventually reconnected because I went to jail. And I was sent to treatment again, and my parents helped me to go to treatment one more time. And it took 6 times in treatment for me to realize that it's what I do when I get out of treatment that is going to save my life and sustain my recovery. And that's how I plugged into the community of recovery supports that are not widely available or visible. Today, I have 10 years abstinence-free from heroin and all drugs, including alcohol. I'm not in recovery today because of my story. My story doesn't keep me abstinent. I'm sober today because of incredible people in the community like this panel to whom I am accountable, and whom we mutually support each other and hold up a higher vision of each other. I got to go back to school as a person in recovery. I went to the University of Michigan, Go Blue, and when in their master social work program, and when they didn't have a recovery support service there waiting for me, I was empowered to create one, and it became the formal collegiate recovery program at U of M. I was hired upon graduation to take over the Center for Students in Recovery at the University of Texas at Austin, hook 'em horns, and what happened there was a community came together, a galvanized community who believed in a higher vision of recovery for their students. And the University Board of Regents got behind our center and voted unanimously to expand collegiate recovery programming throughout the entire UT system, all 9 campuses. They received $950,000 from the UT system in 2012, and just in February, Chancellor McRaven gave another $1.1 million in system funds to further support saving lives on campus. That is a model for the nation. Today, I get to serve as the executive director of an incredible California nonprofit called Transforming Youth Recovery. Our incredibly generous founder, Stacy Mathewson, lost her only child, Josh, to opiate overdose. She has committed over $1 million to proliferating the collegiate recovery movement with seed grants and 3 years of technical assistance from our amazing team. We have helped triple the rate of collegiate recovery efforts and programs in this nation in just 2 years, but that is still only 5% of the 2,500 four-year colleges that are out there. So this is why this is important. This is why we need the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act to pass. Because when my parents came and saw me in the emergency room when I had 2 days to live because of blood poisoning, when they came to visit me in jail, when they came to visit me in treatment, they never once thought, this is our daughter, she's a heroin addict, we're ashamed, she doesn't deserve to survive. My parents thought, this is our daughter. This is why we immigrated from Croatia, to give her and her sister a better life. Why are there no supports for our young daughter who is struggling with heroin addiction? As a result, I have been empowered to seek my passion, my purpose, and my dreams to serve recovery and to help save lives. When society looks at people with substance use issues, they think failure, they think inmate, criminal, prisoner, unredeemable. When we look at people with substance use issues, we know and feel the hope. the restoration, the unprecedented levels of transformation that are on their way, the family reunited. We see the student in recovery, we see the graduate, we see the professional. So we need the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act to get behind our efforts in the community. And if you are a student on a college campus today and you are struggling with your addiction, our message to you is this: you are worth saving. Thank you.
Maybe we should just end it right there. Thanks to all of our panelists for your heartfelt sharing of the issues as they relate to you and to all of us today. We're going to have a couple of minutes for Q&A and comments, but I wanted to ask Jolie a question first right out of the gate, and then Sarah, I'm going to come back to you and Ivana in just a moment. I see Dr. Marvin Sepler, our Chief Medical Officer here at the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, is in the audience today, along with Dr. Harry Hartunian, another one of our docs. And Joe, to you, how is it more difficult for early recovering opiate addicts to continue to recover than it is for other people who have substance use disorders? And if so, what are the special tools that they need, as you all have advocated for and innovated in our organization? What is it that opiate addicts need to enhance their recovery prospects?
Well, it's a complicated question. I think every addiction to every different drug has its own risks and pitfalls moving forward. And I think, number one, medically, for people who are addicted to opioids, the risk of relapse and overdose is so high. So even after they've been sober, their tolerance starts to go down. And then if they were to relapse again, they're in great danger of overdosing. And then the concerns. And there are other health concerns, because we talk about the deaths, but there are the sexual assaults, sex trafficking, hepatitis C, HIV. I mean, there are so many casualties from opioid use that we don't even talk about that are equally important. And so it's not just about the deaths. So I think that there are unique challenges for people who are using opioids because there's no way we can let them hit rock bottom. And hitting rock bottom is not the correct term, because if you have heart disease, you don't need to have a heart attack to change your diet and to fix your lifestyle. And likewise, if you are addicted to something, you don't need to hit any rock bottom at all. You just need the recognition that the trajectory you're on does not get you what you want and what you value.
Thank you, Joe. Sarah, as an advocate on college campuses, not just at Ohio State or Texas Tech, but across this country, what is the result of your advocacy work that you find most challenging and most satisfying?
I think the part that I find most satisfying is just the students and the families that are so appreciative of this gift of collegiate recovery and the opportunity to really flourish in their life. And to see students just completely transform and blossom in front of you is unbelievable. I think that what's most challenging is it's still, folks think that on college campuses that we don't have students in recovery there. And my message is never, we have people here that, are addicted, or we have a big drug problem here. It's always, we have students in recovery here. We have students here coming back from treatment. And we need to support them just like we do any other, population of students, like veterans. We've got a lot for first-generation students, international students. We need programming just like we have for them. So I think that's still, we still have some work to do in terms of educating them that we are here.
Ivana, what do you attribute to the success that you had at University of Texas? I know we did the big event down there at the LBJ Library, and I came over that next day and spoke to the collegiate recovery community there. But to get $1 million from the president, how did you do that?
First of all, a couple reasons. We are very blessed. When I was at the University of Texas, we have 2 regents who are in recovery, and one of them is a very outspoken advocate named Steve Hicks. And we kept pounding the pavement and carrying the message and showing everyone that collegiate recovery will transform the culture of campus if you give it enough resources and make it visible enough. And that's what every single university president wants. They want an alternative to the culture of inebriation and binge drinking and partying that goes on wantonly. They want to see students supporting each other, holding each other up, being accountable, being of service. And that's the hallmark of living a life of recovery. So if you empower students in recovery, and if you carry that message, you will galvanize the community. You will mobilize them in support of this transformation.
Thank you. Dr. Aria, do you believe that the epidemic of substance use disorders among young people is worse today than it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, or has it been pretty much of a constant? And if so, why?
That's a complicated question, but what has changed is that the universe of drugs that are available is expanding greatly. So today we see much more complicated pictures of drug use, whereas maybe 20 years ago there were, 1, 2, 3 drugs, and now with the prescription drugs on board, it just complicates the picture. And also it's changing in the sense that there's that problem with the risk of using something that has been FDA approved for a medical use. And there's a lot of confusion over that it can be just as dangerous to take it without a prescription. So I think that it has complicated it, and I do think that things are more extreme today than they ever have been.
Thank you. Greg, I'm going to give you the last question, and thus you're going to get the last word for today because we're right at 2 o'clock at the top of the hour, and Jeremiah, we're getting close to the end, right? What's it going to take to make October the 3rd and October the 4th here in Washington a success in terms of not just addressing the problem but in promoting the solution? What's it going to take, Greg?
Thanks, William, and thank you, Jeremiah, for organizing everything today. It's also October 5th. I want to call that day out. Carol McDade is organizing a lobby day to do exactly what the majority leader talked about that we need to do. We need to bring stories. I mean, for a long time, I think in this building, we've had providers and professionals coming in talking with members about what needs to happen, but we need families and we need individuals in recovery to come into this building on October 5th. So if people can plan a whole weekend, October 3rd, 4th, and 5th, to come to Washington and really make it a success. What we need is we really need to focus on what we all agree on: stigma reduction, discrimination barriers, the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act. We need to come together. The title of the rally is called Unite to Face Addiction, and I think that's really what's needed, not only from a financial support, but from a galvanizing opportunity to look at this as a moment that the rising tide lifts all boats. I know there's a lot of different nonprofits in the addiction landscape. I know there's a lot of different government agencies and a lot of different folks, but if we can think about and think broadly and think what the HIV movement did, think what the breast cancer movement has done, think what the disability movement has done, think what the environmental movement has done, all of these moments in time culturally, I mean, I guess I'll leave it with an analogy, and I'm sorry to take an extra minute, but as a filmmaker, I was 6 years old during the height of the AIDS epidemic. And I was in middle school, and we made our little AIDS quilt, and it came to the National Mall. And I remember that, but it wasn't personal to me. It didn't touch my family. But I don't think that when they came to the National Mall and they unveiled that AIDS quilt that they knew 25, 30 years later that it would be a chronic health problem today. I don't think they knew that they would have raised $3 billion for research and the solution. So some of the answers that we're going to find after October 4th, we can't predict. But what we do know from history, studying other movements, is that if we can come together and we can collaborate on what we all agree on, the future is going to be brighter than being the worst drug epidemic in American history. We're going to find better solutions. Some of those ideas are in this room. Some of these ideas are in this bill. Some of them will unfold themselves 5 years down the road. But we need to start somewhere. And we just need to face addiction. And we need to come together. It's time. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you to all of our panelists today for your courage in standing up and speaking out. In conclusion, we at the Hazel and Betty Ford Institute for Recovery Advocacy, and I want to particularly thank Nick Motu and Dean Peterson, Jeremiah Gardner, and Jeanette Cleland for their incredible efforts. A lot of my colleagues across the organization made a yeoman's effort to make today happen, but those four were instrumental in the success of today's event. So on behalf of my colleagues at the Betty Ford Institute for Recovery Advocacy, we recommend a 7-point action plan for college campuses and for policymakers for all of you. Number one, education for students and faculty on the dangers of addictive drugs and available resources for help. That needs to be mandatory. Education for students and faculty on the dangers of addictive drugs and available resources for help. Number two, addiction-related curricula in medical, pharmaceutical, and dental schools. Number three on this plan of action, prudent prescribing of pain medications by student health centers and doctors. Number four, naloxone, readily available on campus, readily available to campus police and other first responders with no repercussions for students who call and need help. Number five, student health centers equipped to provide and widely promote screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment services. Number six, sober housing, collegiate recovery housing on every campus. Number seven, student recovery communities on every campus supported visibly by the administrations in the same way that you all have highlighted here today. Those are what we would say are the 7 action steps that you will find. I believe they're on the website. Is that right, Jeremiah? And they're in the bags too, and you can take those bags with no repercussions. And I want to add one more as well in the spirit of what Greg talked about and what I've been doing in my work in terms of advocacy. And it's important, as you heard from the majority leader, it's important that we stand up and speak out. However you choose to do it in your own community or your own place of influence, be it in your church or your book club or in your YPO club or, on the not-for-profit board you serve on, whatever. If you have an interest in these subjects because you spent 2 hours here today, and if you have an interest in the subject, then it's important that you go back and you carry that message and stand up and speak out in an action plan that not just highlights the problem, but as we've heard today, the solution. Hazel and Betty Ford and the Christie Foundation hope you'll take a look in the packets available here today, which includes information from our panelists, a summary of our survey results, our white paper of policy priorities for combating the opioid crisis, and a community opioid toolkit, which itself includes a bevy of resources for teachers, parents, and community leaders. It was 80 years ago today. 80 years ago today, June 10th, 1935, that two men forged what would become one of the great social movements of the 20th century, Alcoholics Anonymous. Today is its birthday. And we know that while there are many pathways to recovery, the 12-step pathway emphasizes a key pronoun, a pronoun that demands the spirit and reality of what has unfolded here this afternoon. We, working together, we can address the opioid crisis for where it starts, among young people. Working together, we can prevent more deaths. And working together, we can get college campuses and communities the help and support they need. As Ivana so eloquently tweeted, and you are such a good tweeter, as you eloquently tweeted last month, quote, "Even one more death from this disease is unacceptable. So together, we can keep that death from happening. Together, we can help those who still suffer." Thank you for being here today.